of course, do remember the real world, just in case we forget, is the place where global warming was an anti-business myth. So, in that world, what would we do? Well, I think in the year 2011, for instance, we might teach every 14-year-old boy and girl to understand and adore Shakespeare. And I don't mean clever boys or bookish girls. Indeed, I have a precedent. I could point out a group of loud, brawling, damaged kids, abandoned kids, kids who the New York education system has been defeated by, kids who intimidate teachers and each other. Ghetto kids in Brooklyn, kids who have been taught by my old Canadian friend Stephen Haff. And when I talk about that first particular group, and I say ghetto, I mean ghetto. Kids at war with learning, or so everyone believed. Stephen's successes with these kids and his battles with the hostile public school system is a long, exasperating, and occasionally triumphant story. Way too long to tell now. But a part of it involves them, these kids, who never believed they would do anything, touring the world with their production of Romeo and Juliet. And I saw it. It was extraordinary. And kids who were just forever unloved and locked out, being sort of adopted by the world-famous Wooster Group, a great, great theatre company in New York. And then finally shooting themselves in their collective foot because that's what life had taught them to do. Glorious success, loss, defeat, and failure. That sounds as familiar as Gallipoli, or Burke and Wills even. So my friend Stephen's still doing this sort of work, and with no help from the city or the state, living on food stamps, creating miracles in the neighbourhood, teaching kids and young adults to fall in love with literature. He's a tricky person to take as an example because he's so obviously exceptional. But I'm talking about the necessity of a whole nation, our nation, rescuing literature. And I'm using some Brooklyn kids and an exceptional Canadian teacher to make an optimistic point. Yes, he is exceptional, but the example of an exceptional athlete does not make us fearful of the future of the sport, nor should the example of a gifted teacher. Clearly, we need a lot more of them, and they need to be celebrated and rewarded, and we'll get to that. But for now, we're looking at these kids in a neighbourhood called Bed-Stuy or Bedford-Stuyvesant reading Shakespeare. And this is so counter to the current notion in which it is seriously thought by serious people that these kids should read books with one explosion and with a severely reduced vocabulary, and then only books that they can identify with, which is to say that the black people, and these kids are mostly black, or all black, the black people should only read books for and about black people, Hispanics only books about Hispanics, women only books about women, and so on. And of course there's a historical reason for this trend, which is that so many people felt themselves excluded from the pages of literature for centuries. And it's an important recognition, but it's no reason to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It is, of course, not at all uninteresting to find yourself in literature. But there is something far, far nobler, far richer to be nourished by. That is, to understand what it is to be someone else. When we read Humbert Humbert in Lolita, it is not, dear God, to identify with him. Nor do we really want to be Madame Bovary, please, or Iago, or all the murderers and tyrants from Richard III, to whoever. Well, never mind, but we are involved in the grandest human enterprise of all, and that is to know what it is to be other, to know what it is to be someone else, to be your neighbour. I am human, nothing human is alien to me, and that was Terence, the Roman playwright. Nothing human is alien to me. The people of Iraq are human. They are not alien to me. The people of Melbourne are human. They are not alien to me. A young man in Steve Haff's group in Brooklyn, New York, right now, is reading a very poorly punctuated novel concerning a dead white Australian called Ned Kelly. Ned Kelly is not alien to Ernesto. And as members of this cult meeting here today, we understand how that is so. That one of the great satisfactions of the novel is to inhabit the points of views and experience of people completely different from ourselves. There's a wonderful Borges story I'd like to quote. History adds that before or after dying, Shakespeare found himself in the presence of God and told him, "I have been so many men in vain, and I now want to be one in myself." The voice of God answered from a whirlwind, "Neither am I anyone. I have dreamt the world as you dreamt your work, my Shakespeare, and among the forms in my dream are you, who, like myself, are many and no one." So it's what we wish to have of a great novelist. A great novelist must be many and no one. Someone who can make Madame Bovary in all her layered, awful glory and never for a second expect you to confuse her with yourself. And yet you will, at the same time, find Madame Bovary within yourself. A much more satisfying activity than identifying. It is the job of a novelist to write books that in my ideal real world of the future, these Palin voters might also read and actually imagine what it might be like to be someone they did not identify with. Of course, and I don't know whether they're Christian fundamentalists or not, probably they're not, but to make the leap to Christian fundamentalism, one of its hallmarks of believers is to stay well away from reading anything that might undermine their faith. And I know more about this than I might otherwise because I have a student in New York, a former Jehovah's Witness, who began to read literature and found himself in a new, more troubled, exhilarating kind of heaven. His name is Scott Cheshire, and you will read his books, I promise you. My classroom in New York is a postgraduate course in creative writing, and we practice a different sort of reading, I believe, to that which is the pedagogic norm. In most classrooms, particularly in high school, we do have an awful lot of effort spent on decoding the signs, understanding the social context, extracting the message. And of course, I would never, for a second, arguing about what we read or understanding its linguistic, social and historical context. But I fear sometimes that the normal academic situation is to put the most delicate and luminous works of art through such a wringer that by the time the year is over, the works of art are dead. And this surely is one of the reasons why those we call average Australians have not been able to treasure the world of literature. They have, in a literary sense, been fed with roadkill. And when school is over, they are very pleased not to return to the scene of the crime. In my own very unlikely life, I have become a teacher, a professor at Hunter College in New York, and from time to time I go to observe undergraduate classes and write reports on, I've become the school inspector, and write reports on the young teachers' performance. Sometimes I get to watch my own graduate students perform, and I am usually staggered by their professionalism and their ability to teach things that they have not yet mastered in their own writing. But I also have reasons to speak to many of them about their failure to transmit the very thing they know the best, the music of literature. the way the words sing to your heart and your soul. Literature cannot be successfully taught without this quality being uppermost. Yet, if you read the book reviews in any country, and I think the United States is really much worse than anywhere about this, you will rarely find this quality mentioned. And instead you'll discover 2/3 of the space is taken up by a plot synopsis, as if it was the story that distinguished a work of art. And of course, as readers know, you could have two quite different novels with exactly the same plot. And one might be garbage and one might be great literature. Yet I find this colourblindness, this tone deafness in teaching and reviewing of literature to be curiously comforting. Something really basic is not being done. So once we see it, we can fix it. Once we realise we've failed, and I'm speaking broadly, generally, knowing there are thousands of Stephen Halfs out there, but once we realise we've failed to communicate the joy, the music, the patterning, the pleasure of literature, well then, hey Jude, we can begin again and make it better. Let our students, let our literate society understand what literature really is. Let us permit our young readers to stretch themselves, to strengthen their reading muscles day after day, week after week. And finally, because no, it isn't easy, finally gain the pleasure from the page that is beyond their wildest dreams. It's like we've had 200 years of bad sex, and finally it's over. So let us learn to use our hard-won democratic liberty to have this intense pleasure in our daily lives. Let us be able to argue and interrogate meaning. Let us learn the very complicated notion of truth. Let us celebrate the river of prose that is a perfect sentence. In all of this, so far, I've ignored the advice of my former speechwriter friend. He was fired, by the way. I just thought of that. But he did say, and it sounds okay, what you do is you tell him what you're going to say, and then you say it, and then you say that you've said it. And in all of this so far, I've absolutely ignored his advice. See, I didn't want to tell you what I was going to say, but I didn't have the nerve to. And what I was, imagine I'd said at the beginning, that I think we're facing a problem of such enormity that our lives and freedom really are quite literally at stake. And I know humour is important, but I didn't want you laughing at me before you heard my argument. So now I'll say what I'm going to say. It's embarrassing. It's sort of a big claim. We don't normally like to make big claims in this sort of way. But let us make Australia the nation of the book. And I can't see him, but I know my friend Leon's in the audience, and I can see that raised eyebrow in my mind's eye, and he's thinking, very nice, Pete. And now how exactly do you plan to do this? Well, the more I think about it, Leon, the more I think about it, I think it's clear the most important people in this equation are teachers. And I don't mean depressed teachers or defeated teachers or resentful teachers or 9-to-5 teachers or teachers who are just exhausted from trying to push back against the tide of cultural crap they are facing every day. We all have, let us say, opinions about teachers, but none of those opinions can change the fact that this profession is the only profession that can save us from our deep, dumb future. We might not like what teachers teach or how the teachers are trained or recruited or even paid. And let us put all that aside for the moment and ask, what would we be prepared to give if we could wake up one morning, and find ourselves in a truly literate and literary society? That would mean a collection of individuals who had actually been taught to think. Now, whoever could perform that service would be of inestimable value. Of course, society might require those teachers of the future to give up those long holidays because they'll sure have a lot of reading and thinking to do. We'd have to ask them to be in continual training to work as relentlessly and ambitiously as a corporate lawyer or a hedge fund manager. And of course there are teachers like this right now. And often they write to me and I write back to them. But it might not sound like the norm. It might not sound like the teachers you know. And I'm saying it is like the teachers you will know. In the future, the very best of us will wish to be teachers. And why not? So, I mean, just imagine if you could be paid as well as a clever corporate lawyer just for loving Charles Dickens and being able to transmit that love to your students. What sort of job might that be? Wouldn't it be more rewarding than, say, holding up an Enron? Or any corporation with no interest at all in the greater good. And I think even though corporations tend not to count that as part of who they are, I think we all think about it. And when you're in a job like that, you're not allowed to think about the greater good. Might we, in those conditions, might we not find that the number of motivated, passionate teachers of literature was suddenly very, very high? Might we not expect the best brains, the best souls in our country, exactly where we need them the most? And this might sound nutty or fanciful, but it's only fanciful if you don't accept that we have a serious problem, a really serious problem. Remember what you heard on the screen and the things that were said. Think the considerable peril we're all in at this moment. We have a problem that cannot be solved by fatalism and passivity. Everyone in this room is concerned about the costs of books in Australia. This is a result of many, many factors, not least the size of our domestic market. One of the very practical consequences of making literature important would be that the unit cost of literature would plummet. The efficiencies of scale would be enormous. We might have the best printing presses in the world. Other countries would come to us to have their books printed. Or they could be just a part of our print runs. And of course, if people would rather read from an iPhone or an iPad or a Space Onion, which I have, everyone is welcome, but I would imagine our publishers would, in this world of lower prices, see the wisdom and attractiveness of producing books as sensual objects. We've sort of forgotten about that a little bit in all these. It's show and tell time. This is stupid, me holding this up, because you can have no idea what it is that I'm doing. But this is a paperback book I brought with me, and it just looks like any other book. But when you touch this book, which is, as you see, very thick, it's just light and lovely and easy in the hand. It lies in your hand like a pussycat. I know people who run art museums who have this particular book on their desk, and people come in and pick it up and hold it and talk about it. It's a lovely, lovely thing. It doesn't cost any more, but it's been made to make a book, again, a beautiful object, a paperback book. That's just something to think about, while we all worry about the end of the physical book. So we're getting to the end. So I've been interesting, or boring, or up myself completely. Because surely, in the real world, it's hard to imagine, say, your average ocker, half-pissed on a Friday night, picking up his well-thumbed copy of Madame Bovary. In answer, I would remind you there is nothing antithetical about reading and getting drunk. Literature, in fact, is produced by some of the most enthusiastic drinkers you'll ever meet. And so, yes, read, then drink. Or do them at the same time. But remember, this token ochre you're imagining has not been through the education system I'm proposing. Remember, you can have a Kelpie and a ute and still enjoy a good book. You can read and then go surfing. You can read and have sex. You can read and still burn the sausages. You can read and have a normal life. And what is an ochre anyway but someone the education system couldn't deal with? In my wonderful class at Hunter College, and sorry to boast about them, but they are sort of amazing, I have a Marine, or an ex-Marine now, back from Iraq and Afghanistan. And we brought him into the program. It was because he had talent and real stuff to write about and stuff to learn. And his academic record was strong, but we barely noticed it because he had talent, and that's really, really what we wanted. And it took me a little while to understand just how much this guy loved literature. This Marine had taken all of T.S. Eliot's The Waste Land, and he had reduced it onto cards this big. And then he'd sandwiched them in plastic. And while he was in basic training, while they did all that terrible grunt and grind, all God knows what they do. It just terrifies me to think about it. I can't imagine. He was memorising T.S. Eliot. And so he could, in the midst of war, or today, or if you would wish him to right now, he could recite the whole damn poem to him. And he's much more than that. It's not just T.S. Eliot, and he's not a one-trick pony. But I just mean it's a mistake to prejudge who might read Madame Bovary. Literature does not create voters of either the right or the left. It simply makes people who can sit still, who can think, who can see patterns in experience, and who know the intense joy of art. To create these voters will cost millions, but we are a nation, thankfully, that understands the social value of subsidy. And we can be certain that the subsidies involved in my modest proposal will do a lot more good for our future than, say, subsidies for irrigation, which have destroyed the Murray River. And of course, the novel cannot save the nation all by itself. Picture.
The second policy I love is the abortion issue.
Partial birth abortion, a baby is within this much of being a baby, and they gouge it from being...
We have laws against it now, right?
Yeah, but they're being thrown out, chiseled day after day.
You think those laws are being taken away?
Yes, they are.
But it seems like in recent years they're actually being strengthened.
He said he was against partial birth abortion, but he's done nothing to prove that.
Well, how has he been supportive of partial birth abortion?
Well, you know, on the spur of the moment, I can't tell you that. I just believe that I've heard that over and over again. And I know it's going on. These procedures are happening.
Where have you been hearing that? A lot of people have said that to us. I'm just trying to get an idea of where people are hearing this.
Well, I belong to church groups, study groups, and, I watch television all the time.
And what are you watching on television to find this?
Well, I watch Fox News a lot.
A functioning democracy needs reliable news and public affairs. We have allowed this vital public service to become a form not just of entertainment, but of propaganda. And we're now living in a world where a politician can make a claim or statement, a lie that is reported and reported and repeated until reasonable people think it must be true. I don't know how to fix this today, but I would say that individual readers of literature in all their teeming, thinking multitudes would know how to tell the world that we were not going to dine on junk food anymore. And this is not just a wish or an opinion. The signs are all about us if we wish to see. The video clips I've shown you this evening were made by two young readers, Chase Whiteside and Eric Stoll. They're only now about to graduate. And they're not from Harvard or Yale, but from Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio. So check out their clips on YouTube, where they are known as New Left Media. Long time since I've heard that term. And I would suggest we just keep on reading, that we read Chris Hedges' Empire of Illusion, The End of Literacy and the Triumph of Spectacle. That we keep the faith. We read John Ralston Saul and Helen Garner, that we spread the word. That we read Raj Patel, but also W.G. Sebald. We read Pat Barker and David Malouf. We read Mark Twain. And this is what Mark Twain wrote about us. Australian history is almost always picturesque. Indeed, it is the chiefest novelty the country has to offer. It does not read like history, but like the most beautiful lies, and all of a fresh sort, not mouldy, old, stale ones. It is full of surprises and adventures and incongruities and incredibilities, but they are all true, they all happened. Long may we be a source of surprises and impossibilities. Long may we think, long may we read. Readers, dear readers, it has been an honour. Thank you.